Leslie Graff rediscovered her passion for creating art around the time she also became a mom. What she didn't anticipate was how much each of these pursuits would enrich the other.
My kids hear me talk all the time about why I create the art that I do and what it says. And they know that I'm passionate about different things. And so attaching meaning to things in your life, being deliberate about the way that we do things, I think that has brought so much into their lives that they wouldn't have had I not done these things. I find how much the work that I have done has really benefited my family. Like, my family would not be as good if I didn't do these things. They know that I'm intelligent and capable and can work as much as I wanted to, and that when I choose not to, it's a choice to devote more time to caregiving or to our family life.
This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. All I wanted for Christmas in 2016 were 2 of my favorite Leslie Graff paintings. They still make me happy every time I look at them. And one of the first things I wanted when I started How She Moms a couple years later was to interview Leslie. She graciously accepted my invitation, and we recorded this interview in the spring of 2018, back before I ever thought I'd be hosting a podcast. Because of this, her sound quality is decent, but mine is horrendous and echoey, so I cut out as much of that as possible. Also, my youngest was just 3, and you'll hear his little baby voice jump in once in a while. I could have re-recorded with Leslie for better sound, but I loved this interview so much that I didn't want to lose the magic of our first conversation. What I discovered as we talked is that Leslie is just as much a philosopher as an artist. I'm so excited to bring you into our conversation about everything from art to domestic life to feminism to service. We'll start with a brief summary of her career, which started out having nothing to do with art. She got her master's degree in marriage, family, and human development, and then taught early childhood studies and worked as a child life specialist in California. Leslie and her husband moved to Virginia when she was pregnant with the first of their 3 sons. It felt like a natural time to step back from work, so she decided not to look for a job in Virginia and to stay home with the baby when he was born. With a little free time on her hands, she also thought she'd start painting.
It wasn't like I just instantly fell into it. It was, just sort of this slow, sort of like hobby, something fun I like to do that I used to do in high school. And, had always painted, and that, like I had painted a couple things. I was like, I'm going to pull out my paints from high school. We need something on the walls of our house. And, I probably did 2 or 3 paintings or something. I was like, it's cheaper for me to paint something than to buy something.
Right.
So we only were in Virginia for 8 months. And in that time, my mom had breast cancer. Our first child was born. Then the startup company my husband had been working for went under. So then he ended up taking a job here in Massachusetts. And so we moved up here, and I was still at home. And then I started painting just a little bit more. And a woman came over to our house, and she saw a painting hanging on the wall, and she was like, I love this painting. Where did you get it? And I was like, oh, I did it. She was like, well, can I buy it? And I was like, oh, sure. And then she was like, well, actually, I have this gallery shop. Would you do a show? And I was like, okay, I guess so. I'm always the type to take on a little challenge, or oh, that would be really cool. Just for the sake of my own personal development, I'll do that. So then I painted a bunch of paintings, which was really good for me. I was using nap times and my son was asleep, and I would pull out my paints in the kitchen and paint. And then an hour later, 2 hours later, I'd clean it up, put it all away. And so I did pieces, and I had the show, and I really didn't think anyone's going to buy my work. I was like, who buys art? I don't know. And I ended up selling half the show, and I was like, what?
Wow.
If somebody bought one piece, I was going to feel like, wow, I'm super special, And then it just kind of kept going and going, and so it's always felt a little bit imposter syndrome in that sense. And so then, and around that time, I started having miscarriages, and I had 7 miscarriages over the course of 3 years. And so it was for me, I really struggled with how to memorialize that many losses, because I would get like 10, 11 weeks in, and then I would lose pregnancy, and they just couldn't figure out why it was happening, but it ended up that I had like a heritable thrombophilia and everything. But I was really, like, as a child life specialist, I was like, how do I cope with this much grief, loss after loss after loss? And I was like, and how do you memorialize something that's so kind of ambiguous, in the sense that, like, other people can't really relate to that, or there's so many, right? Like, how do you quantify that experience for someone? And I was like, what if instead of an object, I took a talent, and like by developing that talent, that's sort of how I honor that experience, that chapter of my life, because it was really, really emotional and really difficult. And so it wasn't like I was painting therapeutically, but I was painting to have a therapeutic end, which was to create more good things out of grief, right? To allow an experience that was really challenging to then bring something really good into my life. You always feel this weird thing, like, with pregnancy loss, like, you're the only one that ever experienced that, like, nobody knows about it, and it's almost like it gets quieter and quieter, right? Like, it's already a very silent kind of grief, but it was like, you know what, the more I create art, the more that sort of memory or experience expands versus contracts, right? It keeps going. Or there's this really good influence that comes from that, whether it's in the sense of like creating more beautiful things, whether it's inspiring other people to create, whether it's even from an economic perspective, it's like, okay, the more paintings you sell, the more good things I can do in the world with that. And so that was sort of, because that first show that I did was like 2 weeks after my second miscarriage. And so that was sort of like a really defining time, because that was probably my hardest one. I was like, 12 weeks. I was going to tell everyone that I was pregnant at the opening, and then I wasn't. And, so it was like, there was just a lot on my mind.
Leslie went on to have 2 more sons, and she kept painting. I asked her how she found time to paint with 3 little boys running around.
I really sort of confined it to my nap times, or like at night when my kids were asleep, because I really couldn't be emotionally present with my kids and painting well at the same time.
Right.
And I knew that and chose that, right? Because I needed to feel more present when I was with my kids than I could have been doing both. Because a lot of people think, oh, well, you can just paint while your kids are, but I didn't want my kids just watching TV, or just like we just, I was active and doing things with them and, tending to 3 kids. And so I chose to sort of segregate that, because too, then for me, those times when I was creating, it was really peaceful. It was really, focused, and I really enjoyed that. But it was amazing, because that was sort of the time in which I started the domestic series and painted most of the early, original 30 of the domestic series. And so I really didn't paint during the day at all until my youngest started kindergarten, and then I suddenly had more time that was available to me. Even then, I don't spend sort of all day in the studio. I will maybe spend the time when my kids are at school, but I also like to fit in that time, like going to the grocery store and doing other things, because I don't like all those other tasks to sort of pile up into the time when my kids are home. And so I was like, that's not when I want to take off and go to the grocery store. So I still have very much prioritized the time that way. And then it's just been more and more shows and like museum exhibits.
We're going to come back to the domestic series she just mentioned, because it's my favorite. But first, Leslie had some brilliant insights about timing.
I was always this type that was like, I want everything to be on my timetable. And I think sometimes, it's interesting, because I just encountered this with another woman who was trying to start back into pursuing things. And she started an MFA program. And I was like, just be sure that if it's ever not really what you want, or it's causing like too much sacrifice, it's okay to say like, not this, not right now. Right. So, and that's always my approach. sometimes we get a little bit railroaded into like, well, I have to, if I ultimately want to do this, I have to do this now. And I think that especially for women, that's not necessarily true. Like there's lots and lots of ways to get to success and lots of timelines and lots of paths. And it's not always this really direct one, and it's not always the one you would assume. It's not always the traditional one that leads to the most success. And I've always sort of argued for that because I think when you're happy, when you feel in control of your life, when you don't feel like you're sacrificing to a degree that you're uncomfortable with things that you really want, you do better, right? You function better. Like for me, I produce much better art if I'm not feeling guilty or upset or, you know what I mean? Like any of those things. And then when you work, you're working efficiently, you're working happily, you're working, you're just like, you're on your game. And so, I had another friend who finished her PhD and was trying to decide between writing and a tenure track faculty position came up. And she was like, okay, this is like, and she had just had a baby, and she was like, this is maybe what I want like 5 or 10 years from now, but not right now. But if I don't take it, well, I never get it, right? And everyone was like, oh, just take it. This is your dream. And I thought, this is kind of interesting because I was the one who was like, honestly, if this isn't what you want for the next 10 years, don't give up the next 10 years for what you think you want 10 years from now. Because who knows what will happen in that time. Like that same position may come available in 10 years, but you will be happier than if you, for these next 10 years, are just putting in something you don't want for that point you want down the line. Like there's times when you suck it up and you do something, right? Because ultimately you need to have that happen. But I think it's easy to get caught in that sort of like, oh no, if I don't take this opportunity, is anything else going to come for me? Yeah. And I think we have to be much more sort of deliberate and much more sort of willing to set our own boundaries and realize that even when we do that, often the world flexes around those a lot more. So not thinking we have to play the same game as anyone else to be successful, that you can do it on your own time or in your own way, and that doesn't necessarily preclude success or opportunities. It really, like for me, it's been sort of the opposite. I never intended to have a career as an artist, and it's just happened. But I think it's happened because of the way that my art has always been on my terms and in my time. And because of the balance I have, I feel like it lets me create work that's meaningful to me and that's like it's work that I'm producing because I want to produce it, not like I have to do this to sell something. I have to like, I've got to do this, and sometimes you get torn between like, well, how much, like I should probably be marketing my art more. Oh, I should be chasing down opportunities. And I just don't. I'm like, you know what? My life is busy enough. I have enough going on. That's like the last thing I need is to set up for myself some like 30-day challenge of, like that's not, but there's pressure, I think, to do those things. You look around you and you see other people doing that, or you think, oh, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing because other people do that in their career or in their business. And then you go, but that's not what I want to do. And it's okay. And then, opportunities happen and it just works out. So that's more my philosophy, is that I should be really deliberate and make those choices and make them in a way that acknowledges those passions and interests and abilities and develops them, but at the same time retains a sense of control in your life in terms of relationships, other things you need to accomplish.
Okay, it's time to talk about the art itself. I asked Leslie what she was painting back in the early days of that first exhibit.
Different from the way I paint now. Like I would say it was more impressionistic then. And it was more like flowers or fruit or like landscapes. It wasn't abstract at all. It was much more sort of straightforward. And I wasn't trying to say anything with my art. And I think over time my art has evolved a lot to be much more representative of who I am, in the sense that my pieces are always talking about something. And so I think I sort of needed this period of time where you get back to just the act of painting. And then you finally get to the point that you can integrate things that you think and feel and want to say and create things that are much more meaningful. And so I think for a lot of people, they don't feel that. But then as they get painting, it starts to come more and more like how metaphor or symbolism or something that's really important to them starts to resonate in their work and in the style, in the subject matter, or whatever they start to do.
This resonates so much with conversations I've had with other women about pursuing their passions, as well as my own experience starting How She Moms. They just start doing what they love doing, and then as they practiced and got better, the steps became clear. I love all of Leslie's art, but especially her domestic series. She painted the first 30 as a set, and she's grown the series from there. I'll post some of my favorites both on my website and Instagram this week, but of course you can also see all of her art at lesliegraff.com with 2 Fs. The domestic series has been displayed very successfully in several galleries and museum exhibits. In fact, you may want to pause this and take a look at some of her paintings in the series before we start talking about them. Each of the paintings shows a woman doing a household or childcare task, from snuggling a betoweled baby after a bath, one of my favorites, to stirring a pot, one that I have hanging in my kitchen. And every painting also has a great title, like Her Mind Was Hot and Stirring Things Up. She got the idea for the series one day when she was sweeping the kitchen after church, wearing an apron she inherited from her grandmother. She realized that her grandma had probably also swept her floor in that same apron and thought, here we are decades and generations apart, and yet we're doing the same thing.
So I thought, this would be really interesting to do a painting, but if I cropped the figure, you wouldn't necessarily know who it was or when it was. And so this sort of came to me while I was sitting in a doctor's office, right, because that was probably the quietest time I had to think, because I was there for an appointment by myself. And so I sat down with this little notebook and started writing down all these ideas. And so most of the series, sort of the idea came to me then. And at first I thought, I'll do 4 or 5, and then my friend Whitney Johnson came over and she saw them. I think I'd done 2 or 3, and she was like, there's something about this series, and you really need to develop this series. She was like, promise me you won't sell any of them until you show them all together. She was like, promise me you'll do 10 of them or something. Well, 10 turned into 30, and and it's gone on and on since then. But it was interesting how much it sort of came to me in a moment, and then a lot of years since has sort of been, continuing those themes. And each of them, the title often refers to something else, or the task that the person is doing is often a metaphor for some other emotional experience. So a lot of times I'll use telephones, and I love those because they sort of depict a sense of emotional presence, because, growing up in the era of corded phones, I remember that feeling of if you missed a call, you missed it, right? You were like, did somebody try to call on the phone? I don't know, And it was that horrible feeling of oh no, what if I missed it? But I love that as it relates to parenting or our lives, that it's you don't want to be oh no, I missed that. We're either there or we're not. We're present or we're not. And so different ones are, they often have food, probably because I really like food. But probably one of my favorite pieces is called Stirring Things Up, and it's an orange background and a woman stirring a bowl. And it was one of the first 4 that I did in that series, but it was more sort of me wanting to speak from my voice about, my views on mothering or on being a woman, or just my perspective on life isn't necessarily the same as other people's. I'm really passionate about the things I believe. And at times you sort of have to agitate for that, or you have to be willing to be a little bit disruptive to say, hey, we need to stir things up, change things up, agitate things a little bit to make things really what you want them to be, and to use your voice to do that in the world, to be really deliberate, and to hey, what I have to say is as important as what anyone else has to say. So why am I not saying things, I made the decision for it to be a self-portrait series because of feminist theory that says, no, you're totally valid speaking from a first-person voice, and you can bring a different richness speaking from a first-person voice. And so it's been so interesting because it does feel like this really strange place to be saying the reason that you have to take my art seriously is because I am talking from this first person, and yet there's inherent conflict and tension in the view of domestic work within feminism, right? And so it's such an interesting sort of conflicted place to be saying, hey, but also as a woman, you have to listen to my voice that says, what role does that play? And so yeah, it's really fun to play with that more academic space that is more conflicted. That's part of life. Like, we need to be much more comfortable with not having super clear answers and having to sort of work through things and figure them out, and sort of a calibration thing that we go through. And so I really like to make us think and make us ask questions and try to figure things out for ourselves. And you know, it's interesting because I often have women, they bring to it their own experience. Like, I'll have people that say, I look at these and I see my mother or my grandmother. I have women who say, this looks like me because I come home from work and I don't even have time to change my clothes and I'm fixing dinner for my kids. And I love that people can see some aspect of themselves or someone they know or relate to it in some form, whether it's contemporary or past, or, you know, or they'll say, when I look at that, it makes me think doing my laundry is so much better than what it feels like when I do my laundry. Like, it feels important, it feels powerful, it feels noted, you know. They're intended to ask a lot of questions about where we've come from and where we're going, what we're retaining, what we're giving up. And they really do want to honor the experiences of women in the past. And I think it was sort of a difficult shift, I think, with feminism to go from this was what women did to you can do other things, but without degrading the experiences of women in the past or saying they didn't do enough or what they did wasn't worth anything. Because I think we wouldn't be where we are now without those generations that came before us. So those investments, that work, that whatever it is that they did got us to where we are. And, you know, we continue to get people to those next places, you know, like that, you know, we're trying to evolve our society and our culture to get to those places, but we have to honor, you know, like, how could I ever look back on the things that my grandmother or great-grandmothers did and been like, I can't believe you just spent your whole day doing that. You know, I could never, ever feel that. And so how do we both honor and respect the fact that that was their lives, that was what they devoted their time to, by choice or not by choice, you know, in many cases, that was the opportunity and the option that was available to them. And yet, as we have so many opportunities and options available to us now, what is the place of those things?
Another of Leslie's series I really love is called Rewind, with paintings of quote-unquote artifacts from the olden days, like cassette and VHS tapes, a boombox, a rotary phone, and a typewriter. I asked her about this series too, specifically the cassette tapes, which look really cool.
I love them because, again, it's this sort of existential feeling behind those pieces. So they're usually titled, do you want to fast forward, rewind, or eject? About how in life, like, there's a feeling that, like, every person in the world feels, where at times you just want to hurry up and get to some other point in your life, or there's times when you just want to go back and do something over again, or those times when you're just like, I want out. This isn't like, you know, like, that everyone feels one of those feelings at some point in their life. And I love capturing that really existential experience in the metaphor of this object, that's what you do with them. And just these tangible artifacts of your life, like the way that a mixtape, like a playlist, marked a certain time in your life. And so, I love them. They're so much fun to make. So it's always so funny because I'm a little bit all over the place with my art. You know, like, I have definite series, but the really funny thing is people don't always connect the series. And so I remember having a show somewhere, and then I had a show again, and the person was like, the committee that chose for the show had no idea that you were the same artist from the other pieces, But I was always like, who says you have to paint the same thing all the time? That's not creative. You can go in whatever directions you want to go. So I tend to be a little bit disruptive against the establishment. And I'm like, I don't care. I think the part that's been most exciting for me when I have had success, I think about it, and it's not like, oh my goodness, I'm so amazing. But what's so exciting to me is that kind of success has come through this alternate path, right? It's come through being like, I'm choosing to stay home with my kids. It's come through, I'm going to paint at night when my kids are in bed. It's come from this place where I controlled it and where I chose my priorities and created it the way I wanted it, and nobody questions that I don't have a degree in art. In fact, most people are really surprised that my degree is not in art, or that, and they just think, no, but look, this is what's so amazing is when you do it this way, it works, and you can achieve this same success, you know, that I can't even imagine being at this point if I had gone into only art. And so that's the part where it reaffirms to you inside in just a different way that you're like, no, this is the right way. Amazing things can happen when you just trust the way you feel about things and go with that. Which it sounds weird to say that because I'm not bragging about those experiences. It's more just like you just want to be like, this is the part that's so exciting. This is the part that like it can happen and it works even when you don't do it the way everyone thinks you should do it.
I wanted to end with one of my favorite parts of our conversation. I asked Leslie how pursuing her passions has enhanced her family life.
You know, I find how much the work that I have done has really benefited my family. Like, my family would not be as good if I didn't do these things, right? Whether it's, you know, my oldest son starts college in the fall, and he's planning to be an industrial designer. And so, which is kind of funny because my husband's a mechanical engineer and I'm an artist, right? So it's kind of like if you merge the two, you probably get that. But, like, I don't think he would be in the place that he is in terms of going off to school, already having a portfolio, having this, like, sense of art and aesthetics and composition and color and, like, you know, so many different things from, you know, he's worked as my art assistant. He goes to my openings at museums, talks to curators, you know, like helps do so many things. So it's not even just in these, but in these very practical senses, if he hadn't had this environment or experience, he wouldn't be in the place that he is in terms of his own professional experience, you know, the way that we approach a problem, the way that we design a space, the way that you know, any of these things. It's only really benefited my children, and I always love art because of the way that it teaches you how to think. Like, art teaches you to be so flexible. It teaches you that you can always start over, that there's always fresh paper, that you can do things 100 different ways, that you can come back to something later and change it and alter it, and, you know, ending points aren't finite. And that whole philosophy and mentality that's such a part of art is very much like the philosophy in our home. And it's kind of philosophical. It's meaningful. You know, my kids hear me talk all the time about why I create the art that I do and what it says. And they know that I'm passionate about different things. And so, like, attaching meaning to things in your life, being deliberate about the way that we do things, I think that has brought so much into their lives that they wouldn't have had I not done these things.
Thank you for listening to the How She Moms podcast. If you like it, tell a friend. The bigger the community, the more ideas. There are lots of ways you can add your ideas to the How She Moms community. We have a Facebook group where we share ideas about upcoming topics and help each other solve problems we're facing in motherhood. You can also follow How She Moms on Instagram for quick tips and ideas. And you can go to howshemoms.com where you'll find transcripts of episodes and lots of other great resources. Special thanks to my mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.